They called her the Ice Queen, and her mansion was built on silence, but a single word, whispered by a feathered thief, was about to shatter everything she thought she knew. I spent 3 years perfecting invisibility, serving an Ice Queen whose disdain was absolute. Then, my one secret, a rescued raven, flew onto her forbidden balcony, and I knew my carefully constructed world was about to collapse. The first thing you learn when you work for a billionaire is that money doesn't buy happiness. The second thing you learn is that it buys a very specific, very cold brand of misery. For the past 3 years, I've worked as a maid in the steel and glass palace of Mr. Alistair Finch, and I've learned these lessons every single day. The house itself is less of a home and more of a museum to minimalist architecture, a place where even a speck of dust seems like an act of rebellion. But the true source of the house's chilling atmosphere isn't the marble floors or the 20-foot ceilings. It's her, Seraphina Finch. She's 28 years old, and she hates the world with a passion I've never witnessed before. It's not a loud, theatrical hatred. It's a silent, suffocating kind that drains the warmth from any room she enters. She drifts through the cavernous hallways like a ghost in couture, her face a perfect, emotionless mask. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, slide over you as if you're a piece of furniture, and a particularly uninteresting one at that. In 3 years, she has never once said my name. She has never said please or thank you. She communicates through disdainful gestures, a flick of her wrist toward a microscopic smudge on a window, a single, elegantly raised eyebrow at a towel folded with the seam facing the wrong way. The staff turnover is legendary. Gardeners, chefs, drivers, other maids. They come and go in a blur. Most don't last a month under the weight of her silent judgment. They quit, or they make one tiny mistake and are dismissed with a cold, final word from the house manager. I've lasted the longest. My secret? I learned to be invisible. I move silently. I anticipate her needs before she has them. I've perfected the art of being human wallpaper. I clean her sprawling suite, a sanctuary of white and grey, and I pretend I don't see the untouched books, the pristine art supplies, the grand piano that's always closed. I pretend I don't see the profound, soul-crushing loneliness that radiates from her like cold from a block of ice. My only escape, my only solace in this sterile prison, is a secret I guard with my life. At the far end of the estate, choked by ivy and forgotten by the groundskeepers, is a dilapidated greenhouse. The glass is fogged with grime, the iron frame rusted, but inside there is life, and inside there is Onyx. I found him during a storm 6 months ago, huddled beneath a rose bush, one of his wings bent at a sickening angle. He was a raven, huge and terrifyingly intelligent, his feathers the color of polished jet. I couldn't leave him. Against every rule, against all common sense, I smuggled him into the old greenhouse, splinted his wing with a popsicle stick and medical tape, and brought him bits of my own lunch every day. Slowly, he healed, and a strange, quiet friendship bloomed between us in the musty air of the greenhouse. I'd talk to him, whispering all my frustrations about Seraphina, about the crushing silence of the mansion. He would listen, his head cocked, his black eyes seeming to understand everything. He started bringing me gifts, a shiny bottle cap, a small, smooth riverstone, a lost silver earring from the main lawn. He was my confidant, my only friend. The greenhouse became my sanctuary, the only place on this entire 100-acre estate where I felt I could breathe. The risk was immense. If Mr. Finch, or God forbid, Seraphina ever found out, I'd be fired on the spot. No questions, no severance, just gone. One Tuesday afternoon, the air in the house was even heavier than usual. Seraphina had just had a new girl, barely 19, fired for placing a glass of water on a coaster slightly off-center. I watched the poor girl leave in tears, and a wave of anger and despair washed over me. It was so pointless, so cruel. As soon as my duties were done, I fled to the greenhouse, my heart aching. "She's a monster, Onyx," I whispered, stroking his sleek head as he perched on my shoulder. "She has everything in the world, and all she does is spread misery." Onyx let out a low, guttural croak, as if in agreement. I vented for another 10 minutes, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of hushed resentment. Then, without warning, Onyx did something he'd never done before. He launched himself from my shoulder, his fully healed wings beating the air with powerful strokes. He circled the greenhouse once, then shot out through a broken pane of glass near the roof. My blood ran cold. "Onyx, no! Come back!" I cried, my voice a panicked whisper. But he didn't listen. He flew with a purpose I'd never seen, not toward the freedom of the woods, but straight toward the main house, straight toward the icy heart of the estate. I scrambled out of the greenhouse, my feet slipping on the damp moss, my mind racing. Where was he going? What was he doing? I followed his dark form as it soared over the perfectly manicured lawns, my horror growing with every beat of his wings. He was flying directly towards Seraphina's suite, towards her private second-floor balcony, the one place I was told under penalty of immediate termination to never, ever approach. He landed gracefully on the white marble railing, a stark black silhouette against the setting sun. I hid behind a large ornamental shrub, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was going to be fired. He was going to get me fired. I peered through the leaves expecting to hear a scream, a shriek of disgust, a call for security. But there was only silence. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the balcony, I could see her. Seraphina. She was standing frozen in the middle of her room, staring at the raven. And then she moved. Slowly, cautiously, she walked toward the glass. Her face, for the first time since I'd met her, was not a mask of cold indifference. It was something else. It was disbelief, awe, a fragile, heart-stopping vulnerability. She sank to her knees just inside the door, her eyes locked on Onyx. Her hand, slender and pale, rose to press against the glass. I saw her lips move, forming a single, silent word I couldn't make out. Onyx tilted his head, let out a soft caw, and hopped closer to the glass. And that's when I saw it. The look on Seraphina's face wasn't fear or disgust. It was recognition. A deep, aching, impossible recognition. As I watched, breathless and hidden, her hand slid down from the glass to the handle of the door. With a barely audible click, she unlocked it. The sound of the latch sliding back was deafening in the evening quiet. Time seemed to stretch and warp as Seraphina slowly, deliberately, slid the heavy glass door open just enough for a person to slip through. She didn't step out. She remained on her knees on the plush white rug, her body a portrait of stillness. All the sharp, brittle edges she normally carried seemed to have dissolved, leaving behind something fragile and uncertain. I held my breath, my knuckles white where I gripped the branches of the shrub. This was it. The bird would fly in, she would scream, security would be called, and my life as I knew it would be over. But Onyx didn't fly in. He hopped from the marble railing onto the threshold of the open door, his claws making a soft clicking sound. He stood there, just inches from her, and looked at her. And she looked back. Her face, which I had only ever seen as a canvas of bored contempt, was now utterly transformed. 1,000 emotions flickered across it. Disbelief, hope, a profound and bottomless grief. Tears began to well in her eyes, silver tracks cutting paths down her perfect porcelain cheeks. She raised a trembling hand, not to shoo him away, but as if to touch a ghost. "Nightfall," she whispered. The name hung in the air, a sound so soft and full of pain that it felt like a physical blow. Nightfall, not Onyx. My stomach twisted. This bird, my secret friend, had a past I knew nothing about. A past that was intertwined with the one person I thought was incapable of feeling anything at all. The raven Nightfall let out a low, crooning sound, a noise I had heard him make before when I was feeling particularly sad. He took another hop, closing the final distance between them, and gently nudged his head against her outstretched fingers. That was what broke her. A sound tore from Seraphina's throat, a strangled sob of pure, unadulterated relief. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling his feathered body against her chest, burying her face in his glossy feathers. She cried, not delicately, not silently, but with the shuddering, gut-wrenching sobs of someone who had lost everything, and just impossibly found a piece of it again. The Ice Queen was gone. In her place was a girl, drowning in a grief I couldn't possibly comprehend. "They told me you flew away," she wept into his feathers, her voice muffled but clear enough for me to hear. He told me you were gone for good, that you'd never come back." Her words were disjointed, choked with tears. "I looked for you. Every day I looked for you, Nightfall. For 5 years. 5 years." The pieces started to slam into place in my mind, the untouchable sadness that clung to her, the way she walled herself off from the world. It wasn't hatred. It was a fortress built around a wound so deep it had frozen her from the inside out. It had to be her father. Mr. Finch had taken her friend away. He had lied to her, and for 5 years she had been utterly alone. My Onyx, my secret confidant, was her Nightfall, her lost companion. The bottle caps, the shiny stones, the earring. Were they gifts for me, or was he trying to find his way back home all along? I felt like an intruder on a moment more sacred than any I had ever witnessed. My anger toward her evaporated, replaced by a wave of shame and a sudden, fierce protectiveness. I had to get out of there. I couldn't let her see me. I started to back away, trying to make my movements as slow and silent as possible. Each step was agony, the snap of a twig under my shoe sounding like a gunshot in my ears. Seraphina was still cradling the raven, murmuring to him, stroking his feathers. It seemed like I was going to make it. I was almost clear of the ornamental shrubs, almost back in the relative safety of the long shadow cast by the house. I took one final, slow step back. And that's when it happened. Nightfall, still nestled in Seraphina's arms, lifted his head. He turned his intelligent, jet-black eyes from her tear-streaked face and looked directly at me. He stared right into my hiding spot. There was no mistaking it. He saw me. He knew I was there. He let out a single, sharp caw. Seraphina's crying stopped instantly. Her body went rigid. She followed his gaze, her own winter sky eyes piercing through the twilight and the leaves, locking directly onto mine. For a heartbeat there was absolute silence. My blood turned to ice in my veins. It was over, but she didn't scream. She didn't call for security. Her expression wasn't angry. It was something far more terrifying, perfectly, unnervingly calm. She gently set Nightfall down on the carpet beside her, rose to her feet with an unearthly grace, and smoothed down her silk dress. Her eyes never left mine. Then her voice cut through the air, no longer choked with sobs, but clear and steady as a bell, carrying a weight I had never heard before. "You can come out now." My feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to disappear into the woods and never look back. But her voice wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, imbued with the quiet, absolute authority I'd always associated with her father. My invisibility cloak, the one I had so carefully crafted over 3 years, had been ripped away. Stepping out from behind the shrubbery felt like stepping onto a stage under a single, blinding spotlight. I kept my eyes down, my hands trembling at my sides, and walked slowly toward the open balcony door, fully expecting the axe to fall. I prepared myself for the cold dismissal, the accusations of trespassing, of animal smuggling, of something, anything. I stopped a few feet from the threshold, still on the grass, unable to bring myself to step into her private space. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I could feel her gaze on me, dissecting, analyzing. I risked a glance up. She was looking at me, her face once again an unreadable mask, but the ice was gone. The raw grief from moments before had been replaced by a sharp, unnerving intelligence. Nightfall hopped onto the arm of a nearby chair, watching the scene unfold with an almost human-like curiosity. "You're the one," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "You're the one who found him." I could only manage a nod, my throat too tight for words. "His wing, it was broken." She stated this as a fact, her eyes flicking to the raven, who flexed his wing as if on cue. "You fixed it." Again I just nodded. My mind was a chaotic storm. I should be apologizing, begging for my job, explaining myself. But the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed by the sheer surreality of the situation, of standing before a weeping Seraphina Finch, who was now speaking to me, the maid, as if I were a real person. She took a step closer, stopping right at the edge of the balcony. "For how long?" "6 months, Miss Finch," I whispered, the words scratching their way out. "I found him after that big thunderstorm in April." A flicker of something pain maybe crossed her face at the mention of the timeline. 6 months. For 6 months her lost friend had been just a few hundred yards away, hidden in a forgotten corner of her own property. "You kept him in the old greenhouse," she said, her gaze drifting toward the far end of the garden. "He brought me your earring. I lost it near the rose garden last summer." She gestured to a small velvet-lined box on her dresser. Inside I could see the glint of the silver earring he had brought me weeks ago. My gift had been his attempt to signal her. I didn't know," I stammered. "I just thought he was a wild bird. I didn't want him to die." She looked back at me, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You saved his life." She said the words with a quiet finality. Then she did something that shocked me more than anything else that evening. She gestured toward the inside of her suite. "Come in, please." The word "please" hung in the air between us, as alien and unexpected as a snowstorm in July. Hesitantly, I wiped my dirt-stained hands on my trousers and stepped over the threshold, from my world into hers. The room was just as I'd always seen it while cleaning, immaculate, sterile, a symphony in white and gray. But now, with her and the raven in it, it felt different. It felt occupied, lived in. She walked over to a small, elegant writing desk and pulled out a chair. "Sit." I sat on the very edge of the silk-upholstered chair, feeling coarse and out of place. She didn't sit, but instead paced the room slowly, her arms wrapped around herself. My father, she began, her voice low and tight, hates messes. He hates anything he can't control. When I was a child, my mother gave me Nightfall. He was a fledgling then. He was my only friend after she was gone. The pause was heavy with unspoken tragedy. For years it was just me and him. He was smart. He understood me. He was everything. She stopped pacing and looked at Nightfall, who cawed softly. 5 years ago, on my 23rd birthday, my father decided I was too old for a pet. He said it was undignified. We had a terrible fight. The next morning, Nightfall was gone. The window was open. My father told me he'd simply flown away, that wild animals always return to the wild. She let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. I knew he was lying. Nightfall would never have left me, but I had no proof. I searched for weeks. Eventually, I just stopped. She turned to face me, her eyes boring into mine. He didn't fly away. My father got rid of him. I don't know how. Drove him miles away, paid someone to take him. But he underestimated him. He underestimated us. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't just about a lost pet. This was about a lifetime of manipulation and cold, calculated cruelty at the hands of her own father. Mr. Alistair Finch, the man who signed my paychecks, the titan of industry, was a monster in a bespoke suit. He can't know, Serafina said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He can't know Nightfall is back. If he finds out, he'll make sure he's gone for good this time. He would not make the same mistake twice. What are you going to do? I asked, my own fear for the bird, and now for her overriding my fear of being fired. She finally looked at me, truly looked at me, as an equal, as a co-conspirator. A slow, dangerous smile touched her lips for the first time, and it transformed her entire face. The ice was back, but it wasn't the ice of misery anymore. It was the hard, sharp ice of purpose. You and I, she said, her voice like cracking glaciers, are going to keep a secret. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But that's not all. You saved him once. Now, I need your help to do something more. I need you to help me get him out of here, out of this country, somewhere my father can never find him. My mind reeled. Smuggling a bird out of the country? This was insane. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined. It was illegal. It was dangerous. It was impossible. But how? I breathed. Security, the staff, your father. He sees everything. Serafina's smile widened, becoming a sharp, predatory thing. My father sees what he wants to see. He sees a broken daughter who does nothing but mope in her room. He sees a maid who is practically invisible. He doesn't see us. She walked to her dresser and picked up the velvet box containing the earring. She opened it, but her gaze wasn't on the jewelry. It was on the box's false bottom, which she flicked open with a practiced thumbnail. Inside, nestled in the hidden compartment, was not a wad of cash or a secret key. It was a single, pristine, high-caliber bullet. The sight of the bullet sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. It lay there, brassy and lethal, a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings. My mind, already struggling to process smuggling a raven, was now grappling with a far more terrifying reality. Serafina wasn't just planning an escape. She was prepared for a war. Miss Finch, I started, my voice barely a whisper. What is that for? She closed the compartment with a soft click, her movements calm and deliberate. It's a reminder, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. A reminder of what happens when you let someone have absolute power over you. It belonged to my mother. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The rumors I'd heard whispered among the staff that Mrs. Finch hadn't died in a yachting accident as the papers reported, but had taken her own life in this very house, suddenly felt horrifyingly true. Alistair Finch hadn't just taken his daughter's bird. He had crushed his wife's spirit, hounded her to the very edge, and then curated a story for the world to consume. Serafina hadn't been mourning a lost pet for 5 years. She had been trapped in a gilded cage with her mother's murderer, her only friend, a casualty of his tyranny. In that moment, everything shifted. This was no longer about saving my job, or even just about saving a bird. It was about saving her. The Ice Queen I had resented for 3 years was a prisoner of war, and she was finally planning a rebellion. Okay, I said, the single word feeling like a vow. What do you need me to do? The next 2 weeks were a blur of covert operations that would have made a spy proud. Serafina, it turned out, was not just a grieving daughter. She was brilliant, meticulous, and possessed a will of iron forged in the fires of her father's cruelty. The money she had inherited from her mother's side of the family, which her father had condescendingly allowed her to keep as a shopping allowance, was a vast, untouched fortune. While I continued my duties as the invisible maid, Serafina orchestrated our entire plan from her suite, her laptop and burner phones her weapons. My role was logistics. I used my staff access to map out the blind spots in the security camera system. I learned the guards' patrol schedules, noting the exact 3.5-minute window when the service entrance at the back of the property was unwatched during the midnight shift change. I bought a large, sturdy dog crate from a pet store 3 towns over, paying in cash. I lined it with soft blankets and modified it with extra ventilation, making it a comfortable, if temporary, transport for nightfall. Meanwhile, Serafina arranged for a private jet, chartered under a shell corporation, to be waiting at a small, regional airfield an hour away. She booked passage for the bird, officially listed as a rare specimen, being transported to a private avian sanctuary in the coastal mountains of British Columbia, a sanctuary that she had, in fact, purchased outright the week before. She also booked 2 tickets for herself and a personal assistant. The night of the escape was tense and moonless. A storm was rolling in, the wind rattling the giant windows of the mansion. It was the perfect cover. At 11:58 p.m., I slipped out of my staff quarters with the crate. Serafina met me in the cavernous main kitchen, a place I had never seen her set foot in. She wasn't wearing couture. She was dressed in simple black jeans and a dark hoodie, a backpack slung over her shoulder. Her face was pale but determined. Nightfall was perched on her arm, preening her hair, sensing the electric tension in the air. "He knows," she whispered, stroking the raven's head. "He knows it's time to go." Gently, she coaxed him into the crate. He went without protest, letting out a single soft caw as she latched the door. Together, we carried the crate through the silent service corridors, our footsteps echoing like drum beats. We reached the back entrance. I checked my watch. 12:04 a.m. The window was open. As my hand touched the door handle, the overhead lights flickered on, flooding the corridor with sterile white light. "Going somewhere, Serafina?" Alistair Finch stood at the far end of the hall, flanked by 2 of his security guards. My heart plummeted into my stomach. It was over. We were caught. Serafina, however, didn't flinch. She set her end of the crate down gently and turned to face him, positioning herself slightly in front of me. "I am," she said, her voice ringing with a cold confidence I had never heard. "I'm leaving." "With that filthy bird?" He sneered. His eyes filled with disgust. "And the help? How pathetic. You will go back to your room. The maid is fired. I will deal with the bird myself." He took a step forward, but Serafina stood her ground. "No," she said. "You won't touch him, and you won't touch her. You won't touch me. Ever again." From her pocket, she pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A moment later, Alistair Finch's own phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance on his face, which quickly morphed into disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "I already have," Serafina replied calmly. "A full account of my mother's last year, complete with copies of her journals, which you were too arrogant to ever find. A detailed psychiatric evaluation you paid a doctor to fake to threaten her with institutionalization. Financial records showing how you systematically isolated her from her own money. It's all been sent to the board of directors, the SEC, and 2 very reputable journalists who are just waiting for me to send a confirmation text. Your empire, father, is built on a lie, and I'm about to burn it to the ground unless you let us walk out that door." The guards looked uncertainly between father and daughter. Alistair Finch's face was a mask of fury. For a moment I thought he would lunge, that he would call her bluff. But then I saw the look in his eyes, not just anger, but fear. She had him. She had finally found a cage big enough to hold the monster. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The guards stepped aside. Without another word, Serafina picked up her end of the crate. I scrambled to grab mine, and we walked. We walked past the furious, defeated billionaire, out the service door, and into the stormy night. We didn't run. We walked with the calm, steady pace of those who had won their freedom. A week later, I stood on a balcony overlooking a vast, emerald green valley in British Columbia. The air was crisp and smelled of pine. A little way off, Nightfall, or Onyx, as I still sometimes called him in my head, was soaring on the wind currents, a black speck of pure joy against the blue sky. The door slid open behind me, and Serafina stepped out, handing me a mug of hot tea. "He looks happy," I said. "He's home," she replied, a genuine, gentle smile on her face. It was a look I was getting used to. The news of her father's sudden retirement and the subsequent stock crash had been front-page news. Serafina had quietly assumed control of her mother's fortune and was now the primary benefactor of the avian sanctuary. "So, what's next for you?" she asked me. "I can give you enough money to do whatever you want. Go to school, travel, open that little bookstore you told me about." I thought for a moment, watching the raven she loved, the friend I had found. Actually, I said, turning to her, I was thinking this sanctuary could probably use a good manager, someone who knows how to handle the difficult residents. Serafina's smile widened. I think, she said, her eyes twinkling, that's the best idea I've ever heard. We stood there in comfortable silence, two women from different worlds, bound by a secret friendship with a bird. We were no longer a billionaire's daughter and a maid. We were just two survivors who had found their flock, and a sky big enough to finally be free. The first thing you notice about the Hawthorne estate isn't the money. That comes later. The first thing is the silence. It's a thick, heavy silence that presses in on you, swallowing the sound of your own breathing. Marble floors stretch out like frozen lakes, reflecting the cold light from cathedral-sized windows. The air smells of lemon polish and nothing else. No food, no perfume, no life. For 3 years I've polished this silence, dusted its surfaces, and tried not to leave a single ripple in its perfect sterile calm. I'm Alara, and I'm a ghost in the house of a man who owns half the city. But I'm not the one you need to hear about. This story is about her, Serafina Hawthorne, the 28-year-old heiress to it all. If the house was silent, she was the source of that silence. We, the staff, called her the Ice Queen, but never to her face, of course. To her face, we said nothing, because to her, we didn't exist. She'd walk into a room where you were carefully balancing on a ladder to clean a chandelier, and she wouldn't even alter her path. She'd just glide past, her gaze fixed on some distant point, as if you were just another piece of furniture. It wasn't malicious, not in an active way. It was worse. It was a complete and utter lack of acknowledgement that you were a living, breathing human being. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, would sweep over you and see absolutely nothing. Her father, Mr. Hawthorne, was rarely here. He was a phantom of private jets and boardrooms. That left Serafina as the lady of the manor, a queen with no court, ruling over an empire of empty rooms. She had no friends that ever visited. No laughter ever echoed down the grand staircase. Her days were a rigid schedule of, well, I wasn't entirely sure. It involved a lot of time in the home gym, the library, and staring out the window from her suite, which took up the entire west wing. She was beautiful, in a way a marble statue is beautiful. Perfect, cold, and utterly untouchable. Every strand of her silver-blonde hair was always in place. Her clothes were minimalist, expensive, and looked like armor. She hated everything. She hated the flowers the gardener planted because the colors were unnecessary. She hated the classical music the chef played in the kitchen because it was distracting. She hated when it rained, and she hated when it was sunny. Her disapproval was a constant low-frequency hum that vibrated through the very walls of the estate. My own escape from this gilded cage was the garden, specifically the old forgotten corner behind the greenhouse, where a crumbling stone wall was being slowly devoured by ivy. It was my little sanctuary during my 15-minute break, and it was there I made a friend, a secret friend. His name was Corvus, and he was a raven. It started simply. I'd left a piece of my sandwich on the wall, and he swooped down, a shadow of slick black feathers, and snatched it. The next day, he was waiting. His eye, a glittering bead of obsidian, watched me with an intelligence that was almost unnerving. I started bringing him things, nuts, bits of fruit I'd saved from the kitchen. Soon he'd land on the wall as I approached, greeting me with a low, raspy caw that was just for me. Our friendship became the one warm living thing in my life at that house. Corvus was smart. He started bringing me gifts, a shiny bottle cap, a lost button from a gardener's coat, a smooth gray stone. They were his treasures, and he'd drop them at my feet and wait, head cocked, for his payment of walnuts. I'd talk to him, whispering all the things I couldn't say inside the house. I told him about the oppressive silence, about Serafina's cold gaze, about how lonely it was to be surrounded by so much empty space. He would listen, his head tilted, his sharp eyes seeming to understand everything. He was my secret, my rebellion, a tiny spark of wildness in a world of rigid control. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that if Serafina ever found out, it would be the end. She wouldn't tolerate an animal, a bird, a creature of dirt and instinct, anywhere near her perfect, sterile world. He'd be driven away, or worse. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was sitting on the stone wall, my back to the main house. The air was cool, and the scent of damp earth was a welcome relief from the lemon polish. Corvus was perched on my shoulder, a rare and precious privilege he'd only recently granted me. His weight was comforting, his feathers soft against my cheek. I was breaking off pieces of a biscuit for him when he suddenly stiffened, letting out a sharp, guttural croak. He launched from my shoulder and flew towards the west wing, a black streak against the pale sky. I watched, confused, as he circled Serafina's balcony once, twice, before diving down. A moment later he was flying back to me, something small and glittering clutched in his beak. He landed on the wall in front of me and proudly dropped his prize. It wasn't a bottle cap, it wasn't a stone, it was an earring. A single, teardrop-shaped diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires, shimmering against the grimy stone of the wall. My blood ran cold. I knew that earring. I had seen it just last night, dangling from Serafina Hawthorne's ear as she left for some high society gala, her expression as glacial as the gems themselves. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a catastrophe. This was worth more than I made in a decade. I had to get it back inside, somehow, without anyone knowing. I scooped up the earring, my hand trembling, my mind racing. How could Corvus have possibly gotten this? As my fingers closed around the cold, heavy jewel, a voice sliced through the air behind me. A voice I rarely heard, a voice that was always clipped, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. "What is that?" I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. I didn't have to turn around. I knew who it was. The voice was closer than I'd ever heard it before. She wasn't on her balcony. She was here, in my sanctuary. I slowly, reluctantly turned my head. Serafina Hawthorne was standing not 10 feet away, her arms crossed, her stormy eyes not on the priceless earring in my hand, but fixed on the magnificent blackbird perched on the wall, right beside me. My breath hitched in my throat. My world narrowed to 3 points of focus: the cold, heavy diamond in my palm, the intelligent black eye of the raven beside me, and the stormy, unreadable gaze of Serafina Hawthorne. My mind, which was usually a quiet and orderly place, became a siren blare of panic. I'm fired. No, worse. She'll think I'm a thief. She'll call the police. The raven, my only friend, has doomed me. I instinctively curled my fingers around the earring, trying to hide it, a completely useless gesture. Corvus, seemingly unfazed by the sudden appearance of the Ice Queen, let out another low, rattling caw, as if to ask who this intruder was. I wanted to shush him, to tell him to fly away and save himself, but I was paralyzed. For a full 10 seconds, which stretched into an eternity, Serafina said nothing. She simply stood there, a tall, slender silhouette against the muted afternoon light, her expression completely blank. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at the fortune I was clutching in my hand. Her entire formidable attention was focused on the bird. Slowly, she took a step forward onto the uneven flagstones of my little sanctuary. I flinched. She ignored me. Her movements were fluid and silent, like a predator. Corvus didn't fly away. He tilted his head, his feathers ruffling slightly in the breeze, and watched her approach with an unnerving calm. "He's a raven," she said. Her voice was quiet, a statement of fact, not a question. It was the most I'd heard her say in a single stretch. Yes, Miss Hawthorne," I stammered, my own voice sounding thin and foreign. "He's just a wild bird. I sometimes leave crumbs for him." He found this. I forced my hand open, revealing the glittering earring on my palm. It looked obscene against my work-roughened skin. "On your balcony, it must have fallen. He just brought it. I was going to bring it straight to Mrs. Davies, I swear." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the estate's oppressive silence. Serafina's gaze finally flickered from the bird to the jewel. For a split second I saw something shift in her eyes, but I couldn't name it. Annoyance? No, it was something deeper. She reached out, her long, pale fingers plucking the earring from my hand. Her touch was brief and cold as ice. She didn't inspect it. She didn't hold it up to the light. She simply dropped it into the pocket of her cashmere cardigan as if it were a common pebble. Then her eyes went straight back to Corvus. "Ravens are mimics," she said, her voice still unnervingly flat. "And they remember faces." She took another step, now only a few feet from the wall. Corvus shuffled his feet on the stone but held his ground, watching her with an intensity that mirrored her own. I held my breath, expecting her to raise a hand to shoo him away, to break the spell. Instead, she just stood there, watching him. And in that moment, I saw the first crack in the Ice Queen's facade. Her shoulders, usually held in a posture of rigid defiance, seemed to soften by a fraction of an inch. The hard line of her mouth relaxed, just barely. She looked not happy, not sad, but something else. Wistful, maybe. As if she were seeing a ghost. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken things. It was a different kind of silence now, not empty, but charged. I was an intruder in a scene I couldn't comprehend, a private moment between the heiress and a wild bird. I should have backed away, made myself invisible as I was trained to do, but I was rooted to the spot. After what felt like a lifetime, she finally turned her head, her stormy eyes meeting mine. The brief softness was gone, replaced by the familiar cool mask of command. I braced myself for the inevitable words. Pack your things. You're dismissed. But that's not what she said. Does he have a name? Ais? The question was so unexpected, so jarringly normal, that I almost couldn't process it. Corvus, I whispered, the name feeling like a dangerous secret on my tongue. A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched her lips and vanished. Of course he does. She turned her back to me then, looking towards the imposing grey stone of the main house. I thought it was over. I thought she was going to walk away, and I would be left in a state of suspended terror, waiting for the axe to fall. But then she spoke again, her voice clear and sharp in the autumn air, carrying an order that made absolutely no sense. Follow me, she commanded, not looking back. She started walking. I remained frozen, confused. Was I supposed to follow her back to the kitchens to be fired by the head of staff? She stopped after a few paces and glanced over her shoulder, an impatient glint in her eyes. Now. Then she added the words that sent a shiver down my entire spine. And bring your friend. My mind reeled. Bring my friend? She couldn't possibly be serious, but one look at the steely set of her jaw told me she was. Seraphina Hawthorne did not make jokes. She did not engage in whimsy. She gave orders, and they were to be obeyed without question. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird in the cage of my chest. How on earth was I supposed to bring a wild raven anywhere? Corvus seemed to understand the dilemma before I did. As if sensing the command in the air, he let out a soft caw and hopped from the wall onto my outstretched arm. It was a gesture he'd only made a few times, a sign of absolute trust. His talons pricked gently through the fabric of my uniform sleeve, a familiar weight that was suddenly terrifying in its implications. I was walking into the lion's den, and I was bringing my secret with me, perched on my arm for all to see. I fell into step behind Seraphina, my boots crunching softly on the gravel path. We didn't take the staff entrance. She led me around the manicured rose gardens, past the shimmering blue rectangle of the swimming pool, and straight to the grand French doors of the main conservatory. My stomach twisted into a knot. This was her territory. I had only ever seen this part of the house through the glass while cleaning it. A pristine world of white wicker furniture and exotic, scentless orchids. She pushed the door open and held it, waiting for me. I hesitated on the threshold, feeling the stark difference between the crisp autumn air and the warm, humid atmosphere inside. He won't make a mess, will he? I whispered, my voice trembling. It was a stupid thing to say, but it was all I could think of. Seraphina's gaze flickered to Corvus, who was now looking around with keen interest, his head swiveling to take in the lush greenery and the high glass-paned ceiling. He's a corvid, she stated simply. They are cleaner than most people I know. And with that she let the door swing shut behind me, enclosing the three of us in the silent green-tinged world of the conservatory. She didn't sit down. She walked over to a small, ornate birdcage that sat on a table in the corner. It was made of antique silver, a beautiful but empty prison. I had dusted it 100 times, always wondering what it was for. She ran a single, gloved finger over the bars, her expression unreadable. My mother loved birds, she said, her voice soft, distant as if she were speaking to herself. She had a canary, a little yellow thing named Pip. It sang all day. My father said the noise gave him headaches. She paused, her finger still on the cage. One day, the cage was empty. He told her it flew away. She never believed him. The confession hung in the warm air, so unexpected and so intensely personal that I felt like I was suffocating. This was more than I'd ever known about the Hawthorns, more than all the staff gossip combined. It was a glimpse into the heart of the silence, a clue to the origin of the ice. I stood frozen, Corvus a warm, living weight on my arm, not daring to breathe. Seraphina turned away from the cage, her eyes finding mine again. The brief vulnerability was gone, her mask firmly back in place, but something had changed. The air between us had shifted. I was no longer just a piece of furniture. I was something else. A keeper of secrets, both mine and now hers. Ravens can live for a very long time, she said, her tone becoming oddly clinical, like a professor giving a lecture. Some have been recorded living over 40 years in captivity. They are one of the most intelligent species on the planet. They can solve complex problems, use tools. She trailed off, her gaze drifting back to Corvus. He met her stare without flinching. And they can talk. My blood ran cold. He just makes bird noises, Miss Hawthorne, I said quickly. Just caws and clicks. She ignored my denial. She took a step closer until she was standing directly in front of me. She was taller than I was, and I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet her gaze. Her stormy eyes were intense, searching, as if she were trying to see right through me. I know they can, she whispered. and her voice was laced with a strange, desperate kind of hope. They say they can repeat words they hear. Words they've heard before. Corvus, as if on cue, ruffled his magnificent black feathers and opened his beak. My heart stopped. I prayed for a simple caw, a normal bird sound that would shatter this bizarre, tense fantasy she was weaving. But the sound that came out was not a caw. It was a dry, rasping croak, a perfect, chilling imitation of a human voice. It was a single word, spoken in a scratchy whisper that echoed the deepest, most hidden corners of that silent, sorrowful house. Lenore. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The single word, Lenore, hung in the humid air of the conservatory, a name filled with a history I couldn't fathom. It was more than a mimic's trick. The intonation was sorrowful, a question and a statement all at once. I looked at Seraphina. The Ice Queen had melted. Her carefully constructed mask of indifference shattered, collapsing into a million pieces. Her stormy eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw not coldness, but a raw, agonizing pain. A single tear escaped, tracing a glistening path down her perfectly powdered cheek. It looked like a crack appearing in a flawless marble statue. She took a staggered step back, one hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her gaze was locked on Corvus, who simply tilted his head, a silent, feathered witness to the devastation he had caused. "How?" she breathed, the word barely audible. "How could you possibly know that name?" The question wasn't for me, it was for the bird. I found my voice, a weak and trembling thing. "Miss Hawthorne, I don't know. I've never said that word." It was the truth. My life was small and simple. I had no Lenores in it. But Seraphina wasn't listening to me. She sank onto a nearby wicker chair, her posture, which was usually so ramrod straight, completely broken. She stared into the lush green foliage, but I knew she was seeing something else entirely. "Lenore was my mother's name," she said, her voice hollow, stripped of all its authority. "She loved this garden. She filled it with flowers that had scents. Jasmine, gardenias. After she passed, my father had them all torn out. He said strong perfumes were vulgar. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I was no longer the maid. I was the only other person in her world. He took everything she loved, the music, the flowers, the birds. He hated anything that was too alive, too loud, anything he couldn't control. And eventually, she just faded. The silence in this house isn't old, Alara. He built it, stone by stone, to bury her in." The pieces clicked into place. The silent house, her hatred of anything unnecessary, her own cold, controlled existence. She wasn't a copy of her father. She was a fortress, built to protect the ghost of her mother from a world that had tried to erase her. "I come out here sometimes," she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "To the West Wing balcony, when no one is around. I talk to her. It's foolish, I know. But I stand there, and I say her name, over and over. Lenore, Lenore, just so the air remembers it." Her eyes flickered back to Corvus, who had hopped from my arm onto the back of her chair. Understanding dawned on me, a staggering, beautiful realization. "He lives in the old oak tree," I said softly, "the one just beyond the West Wing gardens. He must have been listening." Seraphina slowly reached out a trembling hand, not to me, but to the raven. She didn't try to touch him, but simply held her hand near him, an offering. Corvus watched her fingers for a long moment, then deliberately leaned forward and gently tapped his beak against her fingertip. It was an impossibly tender gesture. And with that small connection, the last of the ice broke. Seraphina Hawthorne buried her face in her hands and wept. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but the deep, silent, shoulder-shaking tears of a grief that had been locked away for a lifetime. I didn't leave. I didn't move. I just stood there, a silent guardian of this sacred, painful moment, while a wild raven perched on her chair, a living, breathing echo of a mother's forgotten name. That day changed everything. The silence of the Hawthorne estate didn't vanish overnight, but it began to recede, like a slow tide. The next morning I was summoned not to the kitchens, but to the conservatory. Seraphina was there, dressed not in her usual severe grays, but in a soft blue dress. She was kneeling in the dirt, a trowel in her hand, in front of a series of empty ceramic pots. "My mother loved Jasmine," she said, looking up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I believe you know the head gardener. Tell him I have a new list for him." Corvus was now a permanent and honored resident of the estate. He had free reign of the conservatory and the gardens, and I was given the official, unspoken duty of being his primary caregiver. Seraphina and I spent hours in that glass room, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in a new kind of silence, one filled with peace instead of emptiness. She told me about her mother, a woman who loved poetry and bright colors, and who felt like a caged bird in her own home. And I told her about my life, my family, my simple dream of one day owning a small cottage with a garden of my own. She listened, her stormy eyes filled with a new warmth, a genuine interest. She saw me. One afternoon, a few months later, the sound of music drifted up from the main hall. It wasn't the distracting classical music the chef sometimes played. It was a piano. I walked to the top of the grand staircase and looked down. Serafina was sitting at the gleaming black piano that had sat untouched for years, her fingers moving across the keys, playing a simple, beautiful melody. Corvus was perched on top of the piano, his head cocked, listening. I saw her look up at him and smile, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. The house was no longer a tomb. It was starting to feel like a home. I was no longer a ghost polishing its surfaces. I was Ilara, and in the strangest of ways, through a thieving raven and a secret friendship, I had found my place, and the billionaire's daughter, who once hated everyone, had finally found a reason to love something back.